I want to thank you for taking the time to join this morning's webinar on the quest for the Golden Project Plan. And with that, I give you Theresa and Richard Leigh Stout.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're here to take you on a journey.
Yeah.
We're gonna have some fun and go on a quest for the Golden Project Plan. But before we get started, I thought we'd talk a little bit about why we even do planning. Because a lot of times when we start on a project, clients are thinking, okay, you'll come and you've got all these pre-made project plans and pre-made planning items and you're gonna hand them to us and we're ready to go, but that's not really the case, is it?
No, even with projects that we've done many times before, every engagement is unique. And it's important that we work through a process to build out a project plan that we agreed on mutually with the client.
Absolutely. And so while we could hand you a template of something we've done somewhere else before, if you really want to go and get that golden project plan, the one that's going to guide your whole implementation to a successful completion, then you got to join us on our journey.
Yeah.
So let's get started.
Sure. Maybe I could just set the table
Yeah.
by saying everything we're going to talk about today applies to a medium to large scale project. So if we think about projects with a timeline of 6 or more months, projects that have multiple consultants with varying skill sets, maybe crossing different functional expertise and technical expertise, as well as a variety of roles on the client side where everyone needs to come together to ensure a successful project. That's the level of project we'll be talking about today that this method supports.
Absolutely. So some outcomes that we want to see at the end of this planning phase are our goal is always to do it in 1 month or less. And the reason behind that is we found that that's about the amount of time we need to get all the detail that's required for a successful plan to be in place, but it doesn't stretch planning out so long that project resources start to get tired and feel like they're losing momentum. We want to keep it going and dive right into the work that everyone is anxious to get started. We also want to arrive at some very facilitated discussions around key project areas, which we're going to get into here in just a minute. And as we go through planning, there are going to be weekly deliverables that come out of the process, and all of these ultimately roll up into the project charter and also that golden project plan.
Oh, well, what kind of deliverables will we find?
Oh, well, we're about to start our journey to 4 ancient citadels, and we will find our deliverables lying in each one. So the week 1, our first citadel, we're going to talk about scope verification and definitions. And then from there, we're going to journey up some mountains to week 2, where we do role alignment. From there, we're going to take a dip into the valley, maybe swim through a river or two, and arrive at our week 3 citadel, where we actually develop that golden project plan. But we can't stop there.
No.
Because that's not enough. We have to come up with a way to actually get the work done. And that's our final week 4 citadel, where we talk about allocation and governance. Are you ready?
I'm prepared.
All right, let's go. So we've arrived at our first citadel. Here we are, week 1. It's all about scope verification and definition. And what is scope? It's deciding what's in and what's out. So, some things that we might talk about. Software, the actual modules themselves. We would go through a list and say, each individual module, break it down to its components. What is in, what is out? And you're probably saying, wait. This was part of sales. I already did this. But what we found is what? Sometimes there's a large amount of time that goes between a sales cycle and
absolutely.
when we sign, right?
Things evolve, right? And so some recent examples from our past are, taking the time to really work through creating a statement of work that delineates every module or specific feature that becomes part of this project. But then that SAL goes into an approval process. And once we start the project, there's been innovation. Infor has released new software. They've added new features. They've expanded the capability of the modules. So we need to go back and update our approach and update our scope to take into account the software that's available at the moment the project's starting, and anticipate the software that will be there at go live.
Exactly. And on top of just looking at our scope in terms of those software modules, we also want to talk about your business processes. What areas of your organization are affected by this, and what pieces of their day-to-day lives are now going to be part of this software implementation. There's also some technical scope, isn't there, that we can talk about this early on?
Absolutely. We want to start listing out what tools and technologies are going to be in play. Everything from if there's an on-premise data warehouse that we're integrating with to, what's the best interface technology that, aligns with our skill set and what we're maintaining already. And then, of course, we want to really enumerate out, say, all the interfaces that need to get developed, or customizations, or things that maybe if we're migrating from one platform to another.
Perfect. Then, week 1, we're almost done. What are some of the deliverables that we can expect to have? Ideally, we want to end with a software scope table. That's that piece that'll outline every single module and talk about, is it in, is it out, and maybe is this something we want to consider for a future phase? Along the same lines, a business process scope table, something that looks at each area of the business and is it going to be affected by the changes that we're doing? Also, that first RICE document, what you were talking about, looking at what?
Lists out all our reports, interfaces, customizations, and extensions.
And kind of along those lines, that conversion scope, talking some things that we would want to consider at this phase with conversions.
Well, if we're doing like a new module implementation, we might talk about what kind of data needs to be brought in from a legacy system or even from paper. Are we just moving over open transactions? Is there a year of history, 2 years of history? So for each type of data that needs to be transformed and loaded into a new system, we want to list out exactly what is the size and scope of that data.
And at this point, we might also start talking about that 10,000-foot timeline. Now, don't get excited. This isn't your project plan. But what we might be doing is saying, we're going to target Q1 of 2020 for go live. We're going to target Q2 of 2019 for testing. That high level, so we can start to think about what sort of time frame we're looking at. And also at this point, we like to put in place a high-level budget and burn report because work is going on and we need a way to track the dollars and the hours being spent. But we won't get quite to the detailed level yet. Oh no! We gotta avoid the booby traps.
Snakes!
Yes!
Why did it have to be snakes?
I don't know. So there are some booby traps though in this week 1 Citadel, and we wanna make sure that we step around them and don't trip any hidden wires. So one of those would be poor requirement definition, misunderstanding of what that desired future state is, or maybe not understanding fully what the module's done. Another booby trap would be making assumptions around the scope. You think, oh, well, everybody understands what this is. We were in sales discussions a year ago. We know what to do. And that would be a mistake because, like we said, so many things have changed. So no assumptions should be made at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we keep our pre-sales team engaged with this process as well.
Absolutely.
Make sure that anything that we discussed in advance, we bring that knowledge forward into the planning.
Yep. All right. I think we made it out alive.
Yeah.
Let's travel on to week 2, where we reach our second Citadel and we start to talk about role alignment. So what's role alignment? Role alignment is all about getting the right people in the right place at the right time. So this is where we start to discuss some of those major pieces of any project. I call them big bucket items for lack of a better term, but things like training, documentation, data conversions, those RICE components, installations, these big tasks. Where is that responsibility going to lie? And generally at this point, we're still keeping it pretty high level. We're gonna talk about, is it RPI? Is it a client? Is it a third party? Who's gonna take those on?
Yeah.
We also are going to start to look at the project implementation methodology. Pull out what RPI has seen work successfully on similar projects and talk about how that works here. in your particular project. And then finally, and probably the biggest piece, we're going to look at project resources. Start to talk about the steering or the sponsor committee. Look at what typical consultant client project roles are and what are those detailed responsibilities looking like. So you can start to try to determine who is the best fit for each of these roles. And some of the deliverables that we're going to see coming out of week 2 is that responsibility assumptions table. That's those big bucket items. We'll talk about what they are and who is going to take care of them. Also, a full list at this point of everyone who's going to be involved in the project. And then coming out of that roles and responsibilities table.
Yeah, hey, that sounds similar to a responsibility assumptions table, but I understand they drive to 2 really different purposes.
They really do. So the roles and responsibilities assumptions, or the responsibility assumptions table, that's really pretty high level. It'll be about 1 page and look at those big bucket items and not have a lot of detail beyond what they basically are and who's going to do them. The roles and responsibilities is a much larger document that actually looks at each individual project role, lists out every responsibility during the duration of the project, and also assigns a name to it.
Yeah.
And this is a great tool at this phase because what it does is it forces us to sit down and look at all the tasks that have to be done and who on a project typically does them. And then it gives us an opportunity to say, you know, this person might be a great match for my technical lead, but you know, he doesn't have the knowledge of reporting, so what if we pull those tasks out and add them over here with a training specialist? Or sometimes we'll see it with a project manager facilitating some other areas that maybe a functional lead typically does. So it gives us a great way of having those conversations and figuring out the best way to structure the project team so all the work gets done and it gets done by the right people. And along the same lines, we've got an implementation methodology table. And this looks at RPI's implementation methodology, breaks out the project by each individual phase, and outlines what the deliverables for those phases are. And this is where we talk about, is this going to be a client responsibility, an RPI responsibility, or something that we work on together as a shared responsibility? But oh no! There are booby traps even in our second citadel. And if we want to make it out alive, we got to make sure that we avoid them. The biggest one that will send you into the pit of despair is assigning too many roles to the same person. Otherwise, you might end up at week 4 and you find out that David Schmuck is allocated at 200% FTE. So we got to be very careful to avoid that.
Yeah.
And also, poor resource management or matching is something that can trip us up here too. You don't want to assign your resources purely based on availability. Availability is important, but we also want to make sure that we're looking at their skill and their experience.
Also during this phase, I think it's really important to bring all the parties to the table. Because, you know, if we're doing a functional implementation, you know, we might assume that IT can take responsibility for some things either during the project or maybe later on down the road. And we really want to consult with, you know, who we're assuming is going to be taking on these tasks right here at the beginning, rather than ending up in a situation where people feel that they might have been assigned things without having the opportunity to weigh in on that first.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, it looks like we made it out alive.
Yeah.
Okay. Now here we are, week 3, our third citadel, where we finally get our first peek at the golden project plan. So all our hard work so far is starting to pay off. This is the part everyone is waiting for. We're going to take our scope, our resource, our methodology documentation, and we're going to lay it out in a project plan with dates and resources attached to milestones and tasks. We're also going to begin some technical planning at this point, and an environment or product line strategy. Do you want to talk a little bit about what those look like?
Yeah, sure. That's basically a diagram that shows what are the different application areas that we're going to work in. You know, maybe we're doing a new implementation and we're starting off in a test environment and then moving on to a prod environment. Maybe we have configuration set up in what we call a pristine environment, and then we have plans to replicate out pristine into a conversion environment to support each conversion pass. So this is where we list off how that's all going to work, and it gives us an idea of exactly how many environments do we need, who needs access to what, and when are those environments in use as part of the project, and when can they be available to maybe other initiatives that are going on.
Yeah, and we also at this point start to talk about our training and our testing plan. Now those kind of have to wait until a little later to be really detailed, but this is a great time to start having the discussions on approach. How are we going to train and test? Who's going to do it? When in the project do we want these phases to occur? All right, here we are. Week 3 deliverables. Obviously, the big one that everyone is waiting for is the project plan with a Gantt chart, giving us our dates so we can start to plan. Also, the product line strategy video that you just discussed.
Yes.
And the high-level training plan draft, high-level testing plan draft. These are fleshed out a little later, following design usually, right?
Yeah, absolutely. At this phase, there are certain areas that we just can't plan at a detailed level because we haven't gone through design. If thinking of like a detailed go live plan, that's something that really we need to get at least halfway into the project before we know exactly what tasks are going to be happening at the end. But it's we identify them as deliverables, and we block off space in our project plan to make sure that they get done. We assign who is accountable for them, and we link up what milestones or deliverables are prerequisites for other areas of work.
Yeah, great. And this is also where we update that burn report and the basic budget documentation to really line up with the project plan. So we're tracking our budget and our hours being burned up against the tasks as they're laid out. But wait, we have our plan, but we might not make it out alive from our week 3 citadel. We got to avoid the booby traps, and there's quite a few here. So one of the big ones is not understanding time needs and forgetting to build in lag time, because it is inevitable, especially on a long project, that there will be issues and there will be delay. It's not a matter of when, it's a matter of how much. So give yourself some buffer now in planning and save yourself a lot of headaches later.
Yeah, we don't do a 4-week round of testing followed by a go live 3 daes later, right?
Exactly. Yep.
We always know that rounds of testing are going to uncover issues. We don't know what they are, but we need to build time in, troubleshoot and resolve those issues.
And along the same lines, if you don't consider the other needs of the organization and lag time for those, that could cause a huge problem too. Things like if you've got a major Epic Records upgrade, that could impact your availability of your IT resources to work on your other projects. Or one of my favorites, if a client maybe tries to schedule some training or testing over the holiday season, that's probably not going to work. So those are important things to keep in mind as you're building out your project plan. Also, another booby trap is starting the plan too early. Now, hopefully, if you're following along with us, we've made it through Citadels 1 and 2, and you're ready and raring to go. But starting it too early can cause a lot of pitfalls later on in the project. And
especially if we haven't made it through Citadel 4.
I know. So here we go. We've got our plan. We're running out the door, but we can't go home quite yet because there's one place left to visit. Let's move on to the week 4 Citadel, allocation and project governance. So we've got our plan. Now we know what we need to do. We just have to figure out how to get it done and how to keep on going. And this is where we look at some of those project governance decisions and mapping out plans to make those happen. So this is where we're going to finalize our steering committee list and also lay out our communication plan and maybe some strategy for risk management and an issue management plan. If you'd like more information on the monitor and control project processes, I did a webinar last June called A Tale of Two Projects. It's totally worth checking out, where we go into detail on RPI's methodology for those areas. So week 4, we're almost there, we're almost home. Our deliverables here are going to be that project communication plan. We're going to detail out who gets information when and how. What way makes the most sense for your organization and your project? We're also going to outline an issue management plan and a risk management strategy. Now,
yes, those could be easily confused.
Absolutely.
But they're pretty different, right? And as you explained to me earlier,
yes,
the issue management plan is a process by which issues are handled. But a risk management strategy is a little bit more high level, where we identify and talk about major risks to the overall project.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So we're also going to, at this point, finalize that steering committee member list, and we're going to arrive at that project team org chart. This is really important because it helps us know within the project what the chain of command is, who reports to who, who's accountable for the work. And we're going to take a look at the resource leveling matrix. So what this does is this takes our project plan and looks at each phase, and then all those resources that we outlined in week 2, we're going to take them and figure out what of their time is really needed for each phase to accomplish what we need within that timeline. And this is where we start to get that great document everyone loves where we look at FTEs. So we can know, hey, our lead tech is going to be 100% FTE for these parts, but maybe only 50% over here. And we've got other resources that during testing need to plan a whole month to do nothing but testing, but maybe they're a little lighter earlier on. And something to note is we look at resource leveling not just for clients, we also do it for ourselves. So this document is going to look at your consulting resources as well as your client resources. And that's a great tool because it'll help you see budgetary, what you need to plan for over the course of these long projects. But it also shows our strategy of transitioning more work as the project goes on to the client side. But we haven't made it out alive yet. There are some final booby traps that we need to avoid if we want to get home with our golden project plan. So I think one of the biggest ones is don't set it and forget it. You put all this work in, you got all this documentation in place. Don't just put it out there and then take a step back because it's on the project portal. It's really important that during the course of the project we revisit all these project governance documents at a minimum anytime there's a scope change and a testing cycle. But you might want to set something to revisit it as often as once a month. And I think another booby trap that we see involves backfill, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we're talking about big time commitments for the project. Everybody's got a day job, so we need to make sure that operations are covered during the time of the project and that our project resources aren't split between handling the day-to-day needs of their regular responsibilities and making progress.
So I think we may have made it out alive.
Yeah.
And we're coming here to the end. There's some final deliverables at the end of the planning phase that you should be expecting. And that is the baseline project plan, that golden, beautiful project plan that's going to guide the whole successful implementation. A project charter, which all those documents that were deliverables in the weeks 1 through 4 roll up into a finalized project charter that's ready for ratification. Also, that high-level training plan and high-level testing plan that give you what you need to start thinking about what those cycles are going to look like. And finally, that detailed burn and budget report that gives you what you need to track your budget against the effort going forward. So I think we're home free. We've got our golden project plan, and after all that hard work and dedication, we found it and we brought it home. The efforts of the last month have given your team the best foundation for a successful project, but you don't have to slog through the deepest jungle all on your own to get it. Just feel free to give us a call at RPI, and we're happy to lead you right to your golden project plan. Thank you very much.
That thing belongs in a museum.
It does.